Hello everyone, it's Karen at the Cool Tools Studio, and I'm here today to demonstrate how to do a bezel set stone. In this particular video, I'm going to be making cufflinks, but you can use this technique with pendants, rings, and earrings, however you'd like to. Before we dive in on the making, let's look at what you're going to need. For this project, I'm going to be using 24 gauge sterling silver for the back, and then I've got some fine silver bezel wire. I've got some cufflink findings, and pick a stone that you like. I've got flux, yellow ochre, snips, some dividers, a burnisher, and a stone pusher. I've got hard, medium, and easy solder. I have an annealing pan, a honeycomb brick, a soldering brick, a soldering pick, tweezers, cross-lock tweezers, and then a soldering tripod. I have a torch, a steel block, some needle files, some sanding sponges, and sandpaper. Let's get started. So we're going to start off this project by making the bezel, which is the silver band that will wrap around your stone and get pushed over to hold it in place. And the bezel wire that I have is a little high for my stone, so I'm going to be measuring it and cutting it to the right height. These are dividers, and by rotating the side here, it opens and closes. And you can use it to take a measurement and then mark lines, and you'll have the perfectly straight line all the way across. So I'm going to use it to measure the height of my stone here, and what you want is to make sure you have enough bezel to come up and over that edge where it starts to curve. And you don't want to come over too high because you'll have a lot of extra material and you could get some wrinkles in it. But you want to make sure there's enough for you to be able to set your stone and have some room for sanding as well. So I'm going to scoot this down. And like I said, you want to make sure you leave enough to be able to sand it flat. So that looks about right to me. You can always take it off. You can never put metal back on, but you can always sand more off. So now that I've got the measurement, I'm going to line up with one side of the metal and push down and drag to mark that line. So now I have the perfect height of my bezel marked that I'm able to cut. I've got some tin snips here, and I'm just going to cut on that line. So this got a slight curl to it as it cut, so I straightened it back out, and now we're ready to wrap it around our stone and determine the length that it needs to be. So I always like to put my seam on a long side. I just find it's a little easier. I'm just going to wrap it around. And then sometimes it helps to check it from the back, because you can really see with the flat face if it's meeting it or not. And I'm just going to mark with a Sharpie where my line needs to be. And again, you can always do some filing to take some material off if you need to, so I always err on just a little bit too much. That's where my cut's going to be. Pop my stone out. So you'll want to try to cut as straight as you can, that way you'll have a straight upright seam. So kind of check it to see if those look like they're going to line up well. And then I'm going to bring my stone back again and tuck them in there. And if you can push it down and it comes on top of the other side of the bezel, then you need to remove a little bit of material. So I'm going to grab my needle files and do some sanding. I'm just going to open up my bezel and do some filing to remove a little bit of material. And then I'll just periodically come and check with my stone, and the second that the ends meet nicely, we'll be ready to solder. Now that I have this file to the right size and these ends meet up, we're ready to go solder. So I have my bezel wire ready to be soldered and my ends are lined up. I like to put mine in some cross-lock tweezers to get them off of the brick a little bit. I find that when I place them directly onto the bricks, the reflective heat will kind of encourage them to melt. So I've got my seam there and I'm going to apply flux to it. Inside and out. And then I'm going to be soldering with hard solder since this is my first of 3 solder seams on this project. I'm going to start up my torch, and there's not much metal here, so we don't need a crazy flame. It's kind of hard to see my flame. And try to heat the whole piece. And I'm looking for my flux to run clear. Give myself a little more flame. It's kind of hard to see what I'm working with this light. So once my flux is clear, I come over and pick up a piece of hard solder. And solder is stiff compared to bezel wire, so you want to make sure you have enough to have a seam, but try not to load it up with too much if you don't need it. I saw my solder flash, so I'm going to pickle it and take a look. So this was done in the pickle, and my seam looks good, but there's a little extra solder there that I'm going to file off. It doesn't have to be perfect at this point. I'm just going to remove some of it, that way when I go to do the next soldering job, there's not extra solder to run around. So we'll clean that up more later, but for now, I'm going to be filing one side perfectly flat. And I'm going to do that by placing sandpaper on top of a steel block, and then working in circular motion. And I started with the 240. I'm going to go to the 320. And you don't want to take off too much because that'll impact the fit of your bezel. But you want to make sure you've got a nice flat surface to be soldering with. All right, so in doing this, you might have distorted the shape of your bezel some. So before you go to solder it onto a back, you want to make sure that you put it back over your stone and that it fits perfectly. So that looks good. We're going to measure a little piece for the back plate. So I have some 24 gauge sterling that's going to be my back, and I'm going to use my dividers again to mark the lines. And I know I want a little bit of extra room. So I'm going to cut a strip. It's going to be that wide. And then we'll put them back on there. A little bigger. And about there. So I'm going to cut myself a little piece for the back using the snips again. And you can do all of this with a jeweler's saw as well. This is just kind of the sneaky, quickie way about it. It does, however, put a little bit of bend in your piece, so make sure you mallet it flat with a rawhide mallet on your steel block before you solder. So I have a nice flat piece for my back plate, and I have sanded the face that will be soldered perfectly flat. I've also checked to make sure that it fits my stone well. So we're ready to solder. I'm going to gently pop the stone out, and then I'm going to apply some flux. And then I'm going to place my piece on top and just kind of rotate it around on top of that already fluxed face to get some flux onto it as well. Come up on the edge a little bit. All right, and then since I've already done one seam with hard and I have one seam left to go, I'm going to be placing medium solder around my seam. And when I heat this up and the flux moves, I might have to kind of readjust and scoot the solder around with a pick, but I like to generally place them where I would like them to be. I have my solder tentatively placed, and I'm going to heat up my flux with the torch. And I've got a pick handy in case some chips try to take off on me. So I'm going to give it a general heat from above, but when it comes time to solder, I like to focus my heat on the back. That helps you to keep from melting your bezel wire and also from melting the previously done seam. So I'm going to scoot any solder that kind of ran away on me, but most of them stayed in a pretty good spot. And now I'm going to come and heat it from below. It's kind of hard to see where my flame is in this light. Looks like it needs a little more heat up top. And it's starting to flash there, so I'm going to come back down below. And you want to see the ring flash all the way around your piece. So there it is. This piece is soldered, and I'm going to give it a pickle to clean it up. This has been soldered onto the back, and there's a nice seam all the way around. So I'm ready at this point to adjust the height of the bezel and then clean up and remove the extra metal around it. Now, before you just pop your stone in to see how it fits, you can do one of two things. You can either drill some holes into the back plate and use those with like a drill bit or something to pop your stone out. Oops. Or you can use some dental floss and place that in your bezel before placing the stone in. That way you can pull it back out. So let's see how we did with the fit here. So that's in there, and looks like the bezel is a little high. If I were to push it over right now, it would cover some of the stone face. So decided I'm going to take it down some, and I'm going to use this floss to pop the stone back out. Now we're going to go back to our steel block with sandpaper on it to level out the top face of this and reduce the height. And I'm going to be trimming off this extra after I correct this face. It's kind of nice to have some extra material to hold on to. So now that this is all one height, I'm going to again check the height of the bezel with my stone. And this might be a little bit of a kind of back and forth, but it's always good to be safer than sorry and check it often. So we're close, so I'm going to do a little bit more on the 220, and then I'm going to move to the 320 and 400 since I want that top face to be nice and smooth. So I'm going to do a little more sanding. So I've sanded my bezel and it looks like it's about the right height now. There's some material to still come around the edge, but there's not too much left. So I'm going to use my floss to pop the stone out. Come on. And then I'm going to remove this extra material. And you can use a jeweler's saw for this. For the sake of time in the video, I'm just going to be using these snips again. And if you are using something like snips or shears, make sure you don't cut at an angle and cut into this base layer underneath the bezel, because your material will get really thin as you're cleaning that up and you could accidentally break through your seam. So try to keep things nice and perpendicular. And it's just easy to cut at little tangents around the perimeter here. And I'm just going to keep snipping away at little angles until a majority of the metal is removed, and then I'm going to round it out with a needle file. Most of my metal has been removed now, and there's still some flange and some extra there, and I'm going to use a needle file to file off that excess. I'm just going to work your way around and remove the material and try to flush up that edge of the back to the edge of the bezel. And we'll be doing one more solder seam on this. So again, things don't have to be perfect because there'll be plenty of time for cleanup later. So I've kind of generally roughed out the shape of this with a file, and I'm ready to solder on the cufflink back. And I'm going to be doing that with easy, but as a sort of extra insurance, I'm going to be applying yellow ochre to my previous seams. And yellow ochre comes in a powder, and you're going to mix it with a little bit of water. Some people use oil as well. It doesn't really matter as long as you kind of give it something to become liquid that you can paint with. And I'm just doing this on a tile. You could do it on anything. And you just want to paste. And you don't want it too runny, or if it runs into your flux, then you'll never get the seam that you're trying to solder to flow. So that's a good consistency. And I'm going to paint it on to the seams that I've already soldered. So the joining from the bezel wire to the back, and also I'm going to yellow ochre the seam on the bezel wire. So you're going to want this to dry before you apply your flux. So my yellow ochre is dry, and I'm going to be applying flux. Okay, and I just use these cross-lock tweezers to hold and support this finding while I'm soldering. And it's going to take a little bit of fussing, but just try to place it center. And I'm going to try to scoot it around some, try to get it in the middle there. And the cross-lock tweezers will hold it in place while I'm soldering. All right, once that's in position, I'm going to be using tweezers to place my easy solder. And I'm just going to put it on both sides. I'm just going to place the solder as close as I can to the cufflink finding on the back piece here. Oh, I just kind of nudged it. Get back over there. All right. So now we're ready to solder. And these cufflink findings are pretty substantial, so I know I'm gonna have to give them a good heating. And have your pick handy in case your flux runs off on you, or in case your solder runs off on you. Alright, so you can see the solder seam there flash. So this is soldered and we're ready to pickle it. So this is done pickling, and now I'm going to take some time using my needle file to really clean up and make this edge one kind of smooth surface. And once this is all lined up, I'll move to sanding sponges to clean up the surface. So I've used my file to make this all one even surface, and now I'm going to move on to the sponge to remove the scratches that were made by the file. I'm starting with the most coarse face on the pink sponge. Once I've made a pass around with this sponge, I'm going to flip to the less coarse grain on the pink and then move on to the yellow. So I sanded around and then I popped my stone in, and it looks like it's a good height and we're ready to go for setting it. So I'm going to be using a bezel pusher and a burnisher, and when you go to set your stone, you want to push from one side and then come around to the other and kind of work your way around. If you were to just start at one point and go around in a circle, you would end up with kind of a wrinkle and a crease. I'm just using the cufflink to kind of hold it and support it and brace. You can put it in a ring clamp, or you can use other vices to help support if you need more to push against while you're setting. Like I said, we're starting on one side, and then I'm going to rotate it and do the same to the opposite side. You're just kind of rolling that material, the bezel, up and over your stone. So I've kind of done 4 sides there. Now I'm going to come in between those. And it'll look kind of wrinkly and wonky as you go. It's part of the process. You'll be smoothing things all out as you go. So I'm just going to keep at this until all the metal of my bezel is pushed up and over my stone. So now that I've got my bezel pushed over my stone, I'm going to use a burnisher to really bring it down nice and evenly and flush to it and kind of even out any kinks that I might have. So I'm going to be using this nice rounded side of it. It's kind of hard to do this without putting my face directly in the camera's view. But you're just trying to do nice long strokes to follow this edge and really push it down and smooth it out. You can also use this other side of the bowl to kind of come this way and push the material down and even it out as well. So I spent some time with my burnisher, really bringing this edge nice and even to my stone. And that naturally polishes the metal. And you can either choose to run the burnisher along the side and shine the whole face that way, or on the ones that I had done, I kind of like a satin soft finish with this stone. So what I did in this case was, so I'm just going to use a piece of masking tape here that I've kind of pre-cut to be sort of the right shape to protect my stone. Because I got that matte finish by going back to the 220 sponge. So now that my stone's going to be safe from the masking tape, I'm just going to sand this face again. Okay. So I have this sanded to a nice matte finish, and I'm going to peel off my masking tape. And there's one of my cufflinks. Since those usually come in pairs, you're going to want to make another. Thank you for watching this set stone cufflink video. I hope you give bezel settings a try in your next project.
Visit our Learning Center at cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about new videos, new products, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.